Welcome to The Drop and our Succession Recap podcast. I'm Osman Faruqi. I'm here with Thomas Mitchell and Mel Cambry to break down episode 6 of Succession season 4. Some fun news before we get into our discussion of this episode of Succession. Thomas, you interviewed Peter Friedman, who plays Frank on the show. We'll have that interview at the end of today's episode, but any highlights from that interaction? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, he was great. Probably my highlight was that his general vibe is that he basically feels like a man who just stumbled onto the set of Succession. He was just like, I can't believe how lucky I am. Yeah. He's like the anti-Jeremy Strong. He was like, I don't really practice my lines that much. So yeah, he was a great chat, very fun. And yeah, I hope you guys will enjoy listening to it.
Yeah, really looking forward to that interview. Okay, so this episode 6, I feel like... you're kind of stepping on how I think we generally feel about this. I feel like the first 5 episodes of this season were some of my favorites of this show, of any show in recent history. They were so tight. They were so well plotted. There was a clear arc. There was this emotional tension. Each episode felt kind of contained and though it was trying to tell us something new. I kind of feel like things went a little bit off the rails with this one. It was messier. There was a lot more going on. It was set in so many different spaces. There were timeline and activity things and announcement things that I feel like weren't really explained that well. I just felt not quite right after this. How do you guys feel, top line, Mel, about this episode?
Yeah, well, look, I've just come back from a week off and I think I've been a true delight. These people, they've been in Norway, they've been saunering, they've been having roast meat, they've been having a buffet, and they've come back all completely unhinged. And I felt like it was so manic this whole episode, and that probably flowed through to the level of narrative as well. It was completely...
Manic is a good term. That's how I felt watching this.
Yeah, and there was this part where later on in the episode, Shiv and Roman are sitting and talking, and they're watching Kendall as he's building his house, and she says to him, "This is not good. It's going to be very fucking messy. You're out of control. He's out of control. This is going down." And that kind of summed up my sense of this episode.
Yeah, how about you, Thomas?
Yeah, hated it.
Hated it?
Yeah, least favourite episodes by far. One of the worst episodes of Succession ever.
Wow.
It was just, it was so, aside from being messy, it was inconsistent, which is something that Succession never is. It introduced all these things we haven't heard about before, which is something Succession never does. It was stressful. Yeah, manic is a perfect word. I just thought it was Succession is this perfectly oiled machine with so many balls in the air and it so often works in perfect harmony. And so maybe they're allowed to have a bad episode, but I really, really didn't enjoy it.
But then I started to wonder if that was part of the point. It is we're watching everyone become completely unhinged, and even at the level of the narrative it's doing that. It kind of reminded me of, how when it was COVID and you saw all those people ransacking grocery stores. They're just trying to get out with what they can. I felt like all the characters were doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're all such in awe of Jesse Armstrong and the crew and cast in this. There's a temptation to think that everything that doesn't feel right is actually 17-dimensional chess, and it's actually going off the rails because it makes sense for the broader storyline. I think we'll get into this in the deep dive. I think there was certainly bits of this episode that did work for me, and I think there was some moments that land and some bits of dialogue that were great and some overall points that I think go to this general theme of what this show is about, which is how terrible, fail son Nepo kids are, basically. But I do think there were, inconsistencies and character resets that I feel like I don't want when there's only 4 or 5 episodes of the show.
Also, I feel like we're all obviously Bear Grylls. We had a great time out in the Alps. We won their jackets. Maybe it was just we enjoyed that episode so much.
It's true. It was such a high, that one, and it could be that anything would struggle to live up to it. Let's dive into the episode. So we're back on home turf. We're back from Norway, though we're in Los Angeles rather than the siblings' home territory of New York. The gang is all in LA for the Waystar investor briefing. Kendall's planning on launching a new product, which was actually something his father seemingly came up with. It's called Living Plus. Some sort of weird retirement home meets entertainment suite. We're going to dig into that one later on. He and Roman are keen to fudge the numbers on this announcement. They basically are still not happy with the Matsson Gojo acquisition, and their plan is to juice the numbers, send Waystar's share price so sky high that Matsson can't afford to buy the company and will then have to walk away from the deal. Meanwhile, Shiv has well and truly rekindled her relationship with Tom. They seem to be maybe somewhat honest with each other about their motivations and what they actually want from a relationship and how they feel. She's also keeping up her relationship with Matsson and kind of developing that he's using her as basically his, quote, girl on the inside. So she was having a lot of fun this episode. The episode ends with a pretty amazing set piece. Kendall taking to the stage always ends in something very, very fun for us to watch. Roman, though, gets a bit of cold feet about their plan. He kind of wusses out at the last minute, leaving it up to Kendall, who seemingly does a pretty decent job at the investor event. Emphasis on seemingly, because I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of whether or not this was a win for Kendall in the way that it might feel like on the surface. Matsson attempts to derail the whole thing, but that doesn't really work, and we're left backslapping each other as we celebrate a successful launch of a product that seemingly does not make any sense and has not been mentioned in the show once before.
Yes, big issue with that.
There's a lot to untangle from this, as we mentioned. I think, as we were saying at the top, while most of the episodes of this season so far have been pretty self-contained, set in 1 or 2 locations, set over the course of a couple of hours or a day. This one is a little bit more complicated. It's set in a bunch of different places. There's a lot of characters. There's A plots, B plots, C plots. It might make sense to start with a very opening shot of Logan Roy on a green screen. Mel, did that throw you?
It did. I gasped. I gasped at my desk. It was kind of like the Shakespearean king returning as a ghost. But I loved that it was Logan at his most Logan. He's yelling at people. He's putting his kids down. He's not getting excited when he's meant to be excited. And he's also pitching this completely insane idea. And I think he says something like, it's a collective community, but you get the characters of Waystar there, which this idea of the land cruise. So he's pitching this wild capitalist idea. So I enjoyed that it was just Logan being full Logan. And that little opening segment ends with this kind of stare down between Kendall and Logan on the screen. And it sets up the episode that Kendall is going to try to out-dad Dad. So I think it's a nice way to kind of kick off the madness that follows.
When you saw that, Thomas, was there any part of you that was like, oh shit, he's not dead? Or were you straight away like, it's a flashback, or like, what is this?
No, I kind of was pretty sure that it was obviously a flashback. I have a few people have been said the theory that maybe he was faking his death.
Yeah.
I think it's really weird. Succession would never do that.
not like this many episodes after he's dead.
Oh, he's back. And obviously, I mean, the green screen was a big giveaway. Yeah. I kind of like seeing Logan again. Always good to check in with the big man. But yeah, that idea. At first, I was like, Living Plus is bonkers. At the end of it, I was like, maybe I could live in Living Plus. You get like amazing healthcare and all the characters, like the Hollywood directors come and show you rough cuts of the movie. But yeah, it was a very strange. Again, not my favorite cold open of Succession. But yeah, I guess it set things up well, and then from there it kind of unraveled, didn't it?
I feel like what that scene was doing was reminding us of how Logan looms large over these kids' lives, quite literally, and sets up the fact that both Roman and Kendall in this episode are essentially trying to be their dad and failing. Now, one of my problems with that is I feel like the show has been doing that quite subtly throughout this season. We have been seeing the fact that Roman and Kendall can't really handle the loss of their father. Roman in particular seems to be melting down. And we've also seen that their attempts to try and replicate their dad's business acumen is failing. What annoyed me about this episode was that all that subtlety and that nuance and that complexity of how that's played out was gone. And it was kind of like, if you haven't noticed any of that stuff, don't worry about it. Because this episode is literally going to be their dad staring at them from this giant screen and them running around literally having conversations saying, I am like my dad. I'm going to do what my dad said. And people responding to them by saying, you're not your dad. You're not your dad as much as you think you are. And that just feels so unsuccession to me. Like, it doesn't feel complex.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think their relationship to their dad is as straightforward as they just want to be him. They have a really complicated relationship with their dad. Sometimes they love him, sometimes they hate him, sometimes they want to be him, sometimes they want to exceed him, sometimes they don't want to be anything like him, and that's their point. They want to do something different and carve out a niche of their own. So I do think their relationship with him, both professionally and personally, kind of fluctuates and changes depending on the day and the mood, which is, I guess, kind of realistic, really, particularly in aftershocks of grief.
But yeah, I think I know what you mean. Like, I feel like last episode, great episode, obviously we all love Mattson, and he rolled out the dad line like really subtly, like maybe once, twice. Whereas this episode, it was like Roman said it to Joy, like like, I know you think I'm not my dad. And then when he's like having the argument with Jerry, they have a whole back and forth about dad. Kendall has it with Carl as well. Like, it's just constant. It's like in your face, like, you're not Logan. And then this is like the big dramatic tension that we're going to kind of like lift off of. It felt just a bit heavy handed, which everything in this episode kind of felt. It's weird. Like, this episode in the Succession universe, it feels like it was just like dropped in from a different show.
I agree. It feels like it comes from a different season of the show or a different timeline.
Yeah.
Like, other than the fact that Logan's dead, it just feels like a throwback to the kids trying to do business stuff in this sense. I think you mentioned Roman's interaction with Joy, the head of this, the kind of like Hollywood part of Waystar. What Roman's trying to do is essentially, as part of him and Kendall's plan to juice the numbers on Waystar's stock, Kendall's kind of taking the lead on the Living Plus thing, and Roman is trying to rebuild the studio in the wake of the Calypsotron sort of nightmare. So his job is to go to Joy and to say, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of money. We're going to, you're going to help us create a bunch of new franchises. We're going to kill it in this space. And he ends firing her, seemingly because she wasn't giving him the respect that he thought he deserved. And then you mentioned, Tom, that the similar sort of thing plays out with Jerry. My problem with it is those scenes were fine, and that tension between Jerry and Roman was kind of interesting to watch, but we didn't learn anything new about Roman in this episode that we didn't already know. His character did not move forward at all. All we saw were different examples of him struggling with business and struggling with the loss of his father. It felt like a complete waste of space. I feel like maybe Thomas and I are on the more cynical end. Do you think there's something to be gleaned from the way Roman acted, Mel, in this episode?
Well, firstly, it suddenly dawned on me why they're going to need Joy so much. It's because they need more characters to feel Living Plus. They need it's like, they're going to run out if they're building all of these everywhere. So, yeah, that's going to be a problem. Well, I think last episode, I kind of made the point that I thought a beast had been awakened in Roman, and it could either go two ways. It could either go in a positive direction where he becomes, really invested in the business and really interested in it, or it could go it could go in a dangerous way. And
that's a very positive reading of what you said last week, Mel. You're basically like, Roman sorted himself out, he's working hard, he's mentally well. I'm sorry to say, none of those things are true from this episode.
I've got Carolina doing my spin for me. But I think all we saw, Roman has always had for this entire series, he's always had insecurity about his business acumen, and he is now just projecting that insecurity onto everyone. So they say one small thing like, oh, it's complicated, or Roman, they interrupt him in a meeting and he just completely flips out because I think he's so deeply insecure about what he can do. And that's why at the end he kind of shoots himself in the foot because he just sides with Shiv against Kendall because he's so full of self-doubt. And that is consistent with his character, but I think we've seen that, he's not really made personal growth that maybe I thought he had made on the Alps. But I love there's this scene where they're watching Roman do his big presentation and all the old guards and Shiv they're watching Kendall do his big presentation and all the old guards and Shiv and Roman are sitting together, and Roman is like cuddling a cushion from one of the chairs, and I think it just sums him up perfectly. He's a little boy still.
Yeah, and it could be that what I'm interpreting as a complete lack of growth or development is potentially the point of the show, which is that you think for 4 seasons these characters are going somewhere, but they are completely emotionally and mentally stunted. Like the episode ending with Roman listening to his dad abuse him again and again, which is where he's been since he was a child, when Logan locked him in a dog cage and like yelled at him. So, I'm kind of going back on my point from the start, which is I don't love this episode. I don't want to believe that Jesse Armstrong is this genius spinning this web, but it could just be the point that like every episode you think that there's a game that these characters might win, but even if it feels like they do, I'm going to remind you that they are moronic children who have nothing to offer the world.
And also, isn't that kind of realistic? Like, how often are you showing character development? Like, you've just been complicated today. It's not like every day you get up and progress.
I've been complicated today. Let's not go into the morning that I've had. What do you think about this, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of know what you mean. Now I feel like I'm coming around too. God damn it!
This is the best episode of Succession yet.
I just think Jesse Armstrong is a genius, man. It's crazy. No. I kind of know what you mean, and like, you know, because at the end of the previous episode, when Mattson like obviously really got inside Roman's head, he has clearly like been impacted by that. He talks again about how much he's like. He kind of slides a line into Kendall. I'm like really struggling with death, as Kendall's like, you know, spruiking eternal life. So yeah, I kind of get that, but I guess for me, the biggest issue with the episode was that, firstly, this investor meeting for like what's it called? For Living Plus. We've never heard of this product before, and it forms the entire kind of dramatic arc of this episode. Yeah. That is a really Unsuccession thing to do.
Yeah, normally they would tease or drop some of this stuff.
But we know that the cruise ship division is struggling. We know that the Parks and Recs division is struggling. So what they've done is combine them. It kind of, to me, felt like a Logan wacky idea to make money out of both these struggling divisions.
But we've spent 3 episodes talking about a deal for the future of this company, and this hasn't come up yet. Like, as if Mattson wouldn't have mentioned, like...
Yeah, by the way, how about this big thing that you're about to announce, which I think is dumb?
Yeah. So that to me speaks to the broader problem that I had with this episode, was that all of the like, and again, we've all kind of admitted we're not like big business people. But
I only say that to make you guys feel better. I know a lot about business.
I'm a business guy. No, but like all of that aspect of the episode felt very untrue to me, and very like almost like character versions of this world. And you know, when like you've got Jerry being let go, Joy being let go, like everything was just so chaotic, and it felt like if you were someone in that world and watching Succession, you know, kind of to get a bit of enjoyment out of it, you would, I think, watch it with a lens of this has gone like too far now.
Let's talk about Kendall, because he's the other part of this strategy, and he's the focus of the Living Plus sort of a thing. There was a part of this storyline that I did enjoy, right? Because the plan that they make is ludicrous. We still desperately want to blow up this deal, and our plan is to send the share price so high that Mattson can't afford to do it. We've talked about Roman's failed attempt to do that through the studio division. Kendall's attempt is to make Living Plus seem so amazing that shareholders and investors and analysts in the media are like, oh my God, these kids have done it. They are geniuses. The share price is now $250 a share or whatever. I feel like that is a pretty sharp and funny commentary on how like broken the markets are, because this does happen. Like, this does happen where the fundamentals of a company get overlooked because some CEO announces a completely crazy new idea, the share price goes up temporarily, it staves off their execution, and the company might collapse down the track, but they've had their short-term sugar hit.
I love how his idea is unbelievable growth.
Yeah.
that is the idea. He's like, I've had a thought, finally.
and his only actual, like, logistical plan to pull all this off is to bully his numbers guys into Pete into juicing the numbers, into fudging them, and then to get Greg to edit the video of Logan saying that growth will be double. Mel, before we unpack whether this worked for Kendall or not, I think we all need to talk about just Living Plus for a second. You described it as like a combination of the cruises and parks. The best thing I could sort of piece together around it is that it's a retirement home, but with like a ATN and live stream from the Waystar Studio stuff, and then it's sort of on stage morphs into being eternal life. Like, what the hell is this thing?
Oh, see, I had a very...
You had a different interpretation?
I thought like Woody from Toy Story would be working at the grocery store. I thought like...
It's like a theme park for old people.
Well, I thought they'd be using all their kind of... This is based on Fox. If like Fox actually did this, they would have all their character IP built into the kind of fabric of this community. Because Roman says something about like, he says, and we'll have all our characters from Waystar there. So I like the idea that like Remy from Ratatouille is... working at the
now you're selling me.
Yeah. No, I think I'm moving in. I've spoken to family and friends, and I was actually thinking I could make the pitch that I could work from there, because directors and stars are popping by.
That's true.
Quite useful for a cultural round. But I kind of like the idea that it's so wacky, and how they describe it doesn't really mean anything. So it could be everything or nothing.
Yeah.
It was kind of an amazing idea, though. As he said it, I was like getting more sold. Like, essentially, it's like a gated community retirement home.
You're an idiot investor as well.
Yeah. It's a gated community retirement home that does feature, like, I don't know, some kind of weird Waystar IP where, like, the characters are working at the local supermarket. But then the kind of the clincher and the like chaos element from Kendall is that, and he says it here, is like, with our links to tech and pharmaceutical companies, we will give you privileged access to life enhancement. Like, so essentially he's like, and I think there's even a quote, he's like, if I had another 10, 20, 30, 40 years, like, would I be able to, like, spend more time with my dad? Like, obviously, no one can promise you another 40 years. But essentially, the like, kicker is, we've got the best links to the best doctors and the best medicine in the world. Come and live in this weird, like, Waystar jail for old people, but you might live a bit longer.
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy, but it's also, like, maybe amazing.
And also, I mean, like, privatized aged care is lucrative.
Yeah.
Both, like, in Australia and America. Gosh, I'm really coming around on all these things.
I like that on the slide that they were showing to the investors. The quote was, "I hope we're all ready to minimise surprise and maximise satisfaction," which I thought that's a personal motto I can get behind.
All right, we're all putting our money on the Waystar stock in response to this. I mean, I was sold the moment Kendall came out to another hip-hop track, Public Enemy's Harder Than You Think, which is even funnier than the Jay-Z one. Like, Public Enemy generally, particularly that song, Harder Than You Think, is so explicitly political and, like, against the right-wing media and right-wing politicians, which is everything that Kendall represents and associates with. And he thinks, as he's speaking at this investor conference, spruiking this weird aged care thing, that he has some affinity with Public Enemy is pretty extraordinary.
Also, best use of a hologram since Tupac at Coachella. Amazing. I love that they did that. And it was like, they even kept Logan in character, and he's like, let's just get on with this.
I love that he's got his space jacket on when he is, like, on another planet.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you guys about whether or not Kendall was successful in what he was trying to do. Because when you're watching him on stage at the investor roadshow, he is stumbling at the start. He kind of finds his feet. You see the greybeard switch to actually thinking like, oh, wow, maybe he is kind of doing this. He gets a pretty rough question following Mattson's intervention on Twitter, which we'll get into in a bit. And he responds to that quite well. And when he walks off stage, everyone's kind of like, wow, you did this. You managed to sell this slightly mad idea. The analysts are looking pretty good. Bloomberg's writing some pretty good stuff on their wire stories. And then at the end of the episode, he's smiling. He's at the ocean. He's being reborn, in the sea. But to get there, he basically had to, like, lie about the numbers behind this proposal. This is a publicly listed company. We know that in the Succession universe, the SEC, the Department of Justice are real institutions. I feel like the episode could open... I feel like the next episode could open with Kendall in handcuffs for, like, having completely misled people. What are we supposed to take away from how he went, Mel?
Okay, firstly, I like that it ends with that scene like he's a character in Moonlight or something, floating in the water. It dawned on me suddenly that Kendall, how do we solve a problem like Kendall? Kendall doesn't want to be CEO. Kendall wants to be in Hollywood. He's all about the illusion and the artifice. Give him a film. Like,
Yeah, the clouds.
Yeah.
Cue the rain.
Yeah. And the quote where he's like, guys, the clouds aren't right. They're just not right.
Yeah, I saw them in Berlin.
It was a real exhibition too, which I quite enjoyed.
Oh, really?
Really?
Yeah. Well, I believe they're referencing a film. Yeah, put on the fun fact music.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, to me it just seems like he's all about the illusion. He always has been. And the part he enjoyed most was really the acting of the role and the building of the set. And early on when he has this vision, and poor Denny, one of my favourite characters, it's like, it's a great vision. He has this vision. He's standing in the auditorium where they're going to do the presentation. He's got the spotlight on him. He's got the empty seats behind him. And he holds his hand up. He's got his black director's outfit on. And he's like, I have an idea. And I just think that Kendall's doing the role.
He loves directing these things. On his birthday as well, he was the one who wanted to coordinate, like, how it
Make
all
everyone
worked.
walk in through his mother's birth canal to his birthday. Yeah.
What do you think, Thomas? Did Kendall? Is it a win? Is it a Pyrrhic victory? What's
It probably
what's
is a
going on?
Pyrrhic victory. Like, as he was walking on stage, I was like, oh, because I love Kendall. I'm a Kendall fanboy. So I was like feeling tense for him, and everyone like knew it was going to be a fucking disaster and blah, blah, blah. And then lo and behold, he actually kind of pulled it off. As soon as he said the line where he's like, your family can visit all the time, or like, we can tell them you're out if you want. And he like, everyone laughed and he did a smile. I was like, man, he's got this. Like, never in doubt.
Why you like Kendall so much.
We'll get back to that. But yeah, I think he actually did pretty well. Like, yeah, whether or not the victory means anything, like everyone expected him to fail and he didn't. Then he walks back into that like winner's lap circle and Hugo's like, Houston, we have special or whatever. Like, it's just, Kendall is loving that moment. He's like, I can't even remember it. It's a blur. Like, he's just so deep in it. Whether the victory means anything, I don't know. And also the thing the moment where I was like, that could really come back to bite you is when they actually use that, like, I guess the Logan Roy IP to say double the earnings. Yeah. Like, that is got to be a crime.
It's definitely, there's so many crimes that are committed in this episode.
Adele Ferguson over here.
Yeah. I'm Kemba Clymer and welcome to The Drop.
No, I completely agree. I think they're setting it up because also Shiv and Roman kind of have their hands off it a bit. Carl doesn't find out about what he's about to do. So a lot of people are clean in this, whereas Kendall is. Yeah, Kendall's well in it, and so is Pete, afraid of the potential, the accountant.
Let's jump sideways. Let's talk about Shiv, who is sort of in her own plot in this. She sort of pops up as the siblings are plotting their thing, but she's got two other things going on. She's working with Matsson. She's basically giving him inside intel on what the siblings are up to, which I think goes to what both of you guys were saying last week, that this isn't like so much a romantic or a sexual thing between them, though there is like a little bit of funny flirting going on. Matsson has found a way into Shiv by seemingly opening up to her and is using her for his own benefit. She thinks that she's probably getting something out of it as well. She's got an inside run on the new owners and she's well and truly part of the Waystar crew. But the main storyline involving Shiv is her rekindling with Tom, which is finally happening, which, Thomas, you've been calling literally since episode 1.
Yep.
Well done.
Thank you. Nostradamus.
I have mixed feelings about this. I'm starting to get really sus on Tom. I have a suspicion that Tom's opening up to her and his attempt to be quote unquote honest about what he really wants from the relationship is a bit of a game. I think this is a bit of a wacky theory I've got that is not based on much other than a gut feeling. When Shiv is in that crying room, right, where she's booked out to grieve, and Greg and Tom burst in on her. If you watch that again, Greg is showing Tom something on his phone and he's saying, I thought I'd just show you a selection of highlights from tonight. And if we're putting our disgusting brothers hats back on, we know that there's some sort of investor party on that evening. Are Greg and Tom just looking at who they want to hook up with, who they want to party with? Tom is not in the same place Shiv is in. He's not really missing her, I don't think. I think he's doing fine, but he's spotted Shiv in a vulnerable state of grief, missing a father figure in her life, and he's decided this is my way back into this situation. And for him, it feels quite calculated and quite cold. And for that reason, I don't like it. Shiv's grieving. Let her grieve. I've always been quite pro Shiv. I don't like Tom getting his claws back into her. Yeah, is that a crazy theory, Mel? Tell me more.
Yeah, that's a very dark take on Tom, I think. I think there's definitely been a shifting of the power between them because for so long we saw Shiv in complete control of that relationship, and now we've seen Tom balance that up, but they're just completely miscommunicating with each other. And anytime you feel like you get a sense of authenticity between them, like in the crying room when they have that little kiss, or when Tom is talking about how he wants to keep doing this with Shiv, it's very quickly undercut by them putting each other down and playing the game. Can we talk about the bitey scene for a
minute? I was going to say, maybe the bitey was the big bit of symbolism, like he will bite harder than she does. Yeah, that was a weird game. I do actually kind of really like that take, because I didn't catch that bit of dialogue between Tom and Greg. I didn't even pay attention to it. But that's interesting because then later on at the party, Shiv makes a big song and dance of saying to him are you scoping out which ones are going to be? And he's all so pious and don't be ridiculous. I'm not like that. So it's interesting. I really thought that was a funny scene when, after they sleep together and then basically she's like, he's like, I want this. And she's like, well, you shouldn't have betrayed me, you phony. And then he does his big honest moment where he's like, well, look, I like money. I like my nice suits. I like my watches and nice restaurants. And you were going to basically leave me for nothing. And I sided with your dad because I wanted to protect that side of me. And like, what are you going to do? Are you going to come and live with me in a trailer park?
It's like, if you think I'm not good because I'm only in it for the money, why don't you go live like a normal person then?
Yeah. And it's like, I'm a pig, you're a pig. Let's get in the mud and like live together forever.
I have to say, to the point about what he was showing him on the phone, maybe when I first saw it, I thought that Greg was showing Tom the cuts of the video that they were making for Tom's presentation. And because Tom had requested certain things for his investor presentation, they'd gone into this side room to discuss the manipulation that was at play. So that was how I read it, rather than the Disgusting Brothers way.
On the bigger point about like where our characters are going, if they're developing, if they're not developing, a Shiv and Tom rekindling, if it just ends up with them back together, like, is that satisfying? I'm wondering whether my sort of sense of Shiv's in a vulnerable state, and so she needs someone like Tom in her life, and Tom exploiting that and perhaps it blowing up. I'm wondering whether I kind of am theorizing that because I want that to happen, because I kind of just don't feel satisfied if they end up back at square one, which is them together in this kind of weird toxic relationship.
But I don't think it would be square one because they're both being upfront about their manipulation of each other. So maybe it would be, it's like
an acknowledgement of how transactional.
Yeah, like red flags, everyone, for sure. Yeah. But like at least there's more authenticity there when they're both being awful to each other.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention about this episode, more of a bigger picture thing, and I think it goes to the weird tone of it. Like, nothing felt quite right. The score, which, by the wonderful Nicholas Britell, who we love, there was so many tracks in this episode that had never been used before. And one really interesting motif was that instead of those keys that we hear at different sort of paces and different tones that indicate what's going on, it's all sort of a variation on the theme. We had none of that. We actually had most of the theme replaced with strings, and some of them were quite mournful and slow, and some of them were quite piercing, and like you hear that in like horror movies. You hear that kind of tone in really sad, mournful funeral settings. We haven't had the Logan funeral yet. It added to this sense, I think, of like everything crumbling around them. And I am starting to think more and more, I guess we've been talking about this in the last few episodes anyway, but like maybe when we're talking about the siblings this much, we're missing what's happening broader. The siblings think that everything that's happening in their world is working. They're getting results, while everything else is disappearing. Like, there may not be a Waystar by the end of this season. There may not be anything left for them to inherit because they're making so many stupid decisions. And that might be where things are heading.
I thought one of the through lines of this episode was what is negotiating strategy and what is erratic behaviour. And that kind of flows through to all of them. And maybe Jesse Armstrong's point, if the genius Jesse Armstrong, is that line isn't really there, and that capitalism, if we want to go real big picture, makes human Chernobyls of these people. So yeah, I kind of agree with you that sense of disaster is bigger than just Waystar.
All right, time for our best lines from this episode. Mel, you get the honour of going first. What have you got for us?
Thank you so much. This is when Roman and Kendall are having a chat. They're talking about Living Plus and how they're going to deal with it and what it could become, the potential it could become. And Roman says to Kendall, they're talking about death. I mean, you can get loaded onto a chip and get fired up someone's ass, float around as a gas, live in a tortoise. There's got to be ways through. I don't know, death just feels very one size fits all. And I like that on the surface, this line kind of hints at their sense of their exceptionalism, that they can avoid death and death is an affront to them, and also that they can outrun it because of their money and power. So I like that as a humorous point, but then also there was something mournful about it. There was this idea
They're thinking about death because their dad's gone, right? That's
Yeah, and also when you think about death, you kind of have to think about your own life, and I don't think that's a reckoning either of them are ready to have yet.
Yeah, particularly Kendall, who seems to have flirted with this question a bit more. Yeah.
Well, he'll always have his art, won't he?
Thomas, what about you?
Yes. I didn't think this was a good episode for lines. Nothing jumped out.
Have we had that for the last 3 or 4 episodes or what?
Yeah, the writing's really poor on this show. It's Chris. I should look into it. No, obviously it's great.
Probably why Jesse Armstrong hasn't given you that call you keep asking.
I know. Jesse, I've just got some feedback that I would love to
give. I
think that I mean, you know, normally it comes to an end of an episode, it's very obvious. Like, there's like 3 or 4 to pick from. I had to really struggle. But there's one thing that really did make me laugh this week was just as Kendall took to the stage to begin his presentation, and as we said before, it kind of started shaky, and he's like, big shoes, and he just keeps repeating it, and then we cut back to the guys watching in the, you know, room behind the scenes, and Roman says, big shoes, big hat, big nervous breakdown. Because that's kind of what's happening. You're like, is Kendall about to like fucking implode here? So that really made me laugh. I think just like the rhythm of like the repetition of big was very funny, very Roman. That was my line of the week.
My one is when Jerry and Roman are having their fight, and Roman is kind of firing her, though it's kind of a bit TBC what's really going on.
And he kind of walks it back later.
He does walk it back. And Jerry says to Roman, you know, you're not your dad, you're a weak monarch in a dangerous interregnum. I love that because I love the word interregnum. I don't think I've ever heard it said out loud in a TV show before.
I had to listen to it like a few times to hear what that word was.
They use words in this show that are so good because I feel like smart writers are coming up with them. And literally no one has said that stuff before. I feel like that line is a good moment to pivot to Jerry Watch, which, I mean, basically that is her main moment in this episode where she confronts Kendall, where she confronts Roman for firing Joy and starts giving him a bit of a dressing down. Roman, kind of almost to his credit, like, he pushes back. I feel like there's an earlier version of Roman where he would have just copped it. But again, it just like is underlining this point again and again. I'm my dad. You've got to treat me like my dad. And she literally says, as was just discussed, you're not your dad. And kind of gets fired. But we've said this before. She's the eternal survivor. She'll be back next week.
It's interesting. Once again, she survives. She gets fired. And this is something which obviously you all hear when you stay on to listen to my chat with Peter Friedman, who plays Frank. But one of the points he made, he was like, Frank gets fired in the pilot and he gets fired like 10 episodes later. He's like, these people who've been around Logan Roy, like Frank and Carl and Jerry, they are like survivors and the company needs them a lot. And so there's a reason we're all still there. And I think that's very true of Jerry, perhaps more than anyone. Yeah. She was literally fired and rehired in the same episode last night. So
I like that she delivered so many truth bombs all in one go. Like they wham, bam, bam. But then also part of me was like, the reason they've survived so long is that they've been flexible and able to adjust. And maybe some of these old guards, like maybe you don't be so upfront about where your cards lie. Like, play the game a bit. You know how to work, Roman. Like, stroke the ego a bit and make it work for you. So I was kind of surprised she went so hard on Roman.
Thomas, this used to be Fun Fact Corner, but now it's basically Thomas's Fact Corner. Note the lack of fun.
Inside the mind.
Tell us what you've got this week.
Yes, my fun fact relates to a big moment in the episode when Matsson decides to torpedo the, I guess, launch of Living Plus by sending out a tweet designed to basically tank the share price and make Waystar and Kendall look stupid. And he tweets a picture of a dog. Now, I had to pause this because, you know, it was a flash, but basically he tweets a picture of a dog and the text says, Doderick marked fry. Now, there's a lot going on here that we need to discuss.
There's a lot going on here that needs to be unpacked.
I'm excited to hear this.
Yes. So, for those playing at home, Doderick is one of the Waystar mascots. You can find him in the Bright Star, like, kind of theme parks. And we see him actually in the very first episode. Cousin Greg is dressed up as Doderick and he smokes a joint and vomits in the head. He works
at my local grocery store now.
Yes, correct. We also actually see a little snippet of Doderick, as you may have caught in this episode, as they're heading into the investor conference. There's like a movie poster. It's Doderick and Friends coming this spring. Also, for those wondering, Doderick's friends are Snow Joe and Dirk the Turkey.
Dirk the Turkey.
Yes. Great. And so, once again, I'm delivering maybe a not so fun fact, but a fact nonetheless. Obviously, Doderick marked fry means Doderick will set you free. The slogan coming, you know, from the
concentration camp. Yeah.
During the Holocaust. So, I mean, a very dark kind of missile from Matsson. And, yeah, but it's hilarious that we've got this throwback to a mascot that works for Brightstar that we saw in the first episode, and now he's used it to kind of derail the future of the company. Kind of amazing. But, yeah, for those interested, we will see Doderick and Friends this spring.
Do you think Greg's getting a cameo in that?
I mean, Greg sucks. He's so bad. He's so bad in this episode as well. Anyway.
It's okay. Didn't Roman early on in the season dress up as a giant turkey when he went to do his kind of internship at the theme park?
That is true. Yeah.
So I like the idea that some of these characters are coming back.
I just thought it was, you know, hilarious that this big Waystar investor meeting was derailed by, you know, a kind of crazy tweet from this genius tech investor. I mean,
Yeah, what a crazy thing that would never happen in the real world.
Exactly.
The show, we've talked about the comparisons between the kids and like the Murdochs and those families. I feel like the Matson character is a composite. There's no one for one, but when he's this like genius guy who's a bit of a weirdo, which is an actual phrase that Jerry uses, and he's tweeting during stuff like this, that feels very Elon Musk, basically. To the extent that like Elon Musk would also probably tweet a Holocaust joke and not really think twice
100%.
about it. All right, time for winners and losers. I personally found this one to be a pretty tricky one because I think everyone who looked like they were winning, I'm not totally sure they were. I ended up giving Tom my 3 points just because if the relationship with Shiv is real, even if he's got ulterior motives, he's back in the game. He's back sleeping with the woman that he says he loves, and he's close to someone who's pretty powerful at the moment. 2 points to Kendall. The only reason I didn't give him my 3 is because I am a little bit sus on the likelihood of him going to prison very, very soon. And I gave 1 point to Shiv because she seemed to be successfully managing her relationship with both the siblings and Matson and is in a pretty good position. My loser was Roman. I just feel like he was erratic. He was losing his mind. He was making bad calls and is now marginalized because Kendall's getting all the kudos for pulling off the investor briefing. Mel, run me through yours.
I gave 3 points to Tom. He had the hard job of following Kendall, who literally promised eternal life. But I also like that he had his own Oprah moment where he was like, "You're an ATN citizen, and you're an ATN citizen, and I'm an ATN citizen."
That was
so
really good.
I thought that was very funny. So 3 points to him. Also, he knows how to use a teleprompter. Great. Shiv gets 2 points from me. Because I like the idea of her scheduling crying time and having a crying room. Unlike her brothers, Roman's taking his emotions out all over the place. Kendall's like commercializing it on stage.
Yeah.
Shiv is just
She's scheduling her grief.
yeah, it's nice and contained. It's manageable. It's not flowing out on everyone else. And then I gave 1 point to Carl and his golden parachute. First, I think he had a really good flex with Kendall, which I enjoyed. He said, "I'll fucking squeal." And he also escaped the knowledge of the numbers. So I think he's in a pretty good spot. And my loser was Logan Roy because his children are jokes. They are not serious people.
I love how you just refuse to let Roman lose.
We've got
Logan also a loser because he's still dead.
Yeah.
He's not back to life.
Maybe this is me believing in character development.
Yeah.
Thomas, take it away.
Yes, I was kind of similar to you guys, but a mix. So I gave Kendall my 3. I thought he won. He did really well at that investor meeting. He then had to deal with like a mid-presentation tweet, and again, like the most composed we've seen him. He's like, "Well, I'm not going to favour it." Like he was charming.
That was a good line.
Yeah, it was a great line. And yeah, ultimately, in what was this weird Succession episode that we should never talk about again, he came out on top. Tom, similar to you, he's kind of still playing all these different sides, and he's now back in with Shiv. He seems to be in a pretty sweet spot, and also he's kind of called a spade, and you can't fault that. And then I gave Jerry 1 because, I mean, if you get fired and rehired in one episode, I think that's pretty impressive. And my big fat loser was Roman because, yeah, I mean, let's be honest, he totally cooked it this episode. Second episode in a row, his emotions have got the better of him. I know this breaks your heart, Mel, but yeah, Roman is unraveling. He's actually going full Kendall.
Well, we'll see when he doesn't go to jail.
So Tom has overtaken Shiv on our tally, but she's right behind him. So the power couple still looking pretty good. Time for predictions for next week. Mel, what have you got?
Okay, well, firstly, we did say this last week, but they've got to take Logan's body out of the fridge soon, right? There's got to be a funeral. So I do still think that episode is hopefully coming. I also wonder whether they keep flagging, and they've flagged it for a few episodes now, ATN's links with the presidential campaign, and it's rightward lean. Joy was bringing it up. It's filtering through. And then Tom has flagged with Shiv, should we hold Logan's election party? So I wonder if that storyline is going to come to fruition in the next episode.
Yeah, I mean, between ATN leaking stuff to Jared Mencken and all these SEC violations, I'm more and more of the view, this is my prediction, that bad things are going to happen. Like there was a whole storyline last season about a DOJ investigation. It would be weird for the writers to just pretend that that doesn't exist and the kids are immune. Like, I just think that we're building up to the company potentially being like compulsorily acquired and shut down and people being sent to jail. I think in a weird twist, it might be all these greybeards who are doing their best to keep things like Roman mentioned to Jerry. Hey, you know, I could just come up with the excuse that you messed up the cruises thing and sort of get you out of here for that. I think we're heading towards something grimmer than I would have thought, which is prison time and a lot of people getting screwed over.
And I have one hope that I'd like to add, not a prediction, but I hope Dodoric doesn't get caught up in this poor Holocaust joke. Because, like, we saw what happened to Pepe the Frog. He got...
Dodoric becomes a far-right meme.
Yeah,
oh, my God, that's
exactly.
very
So
funny.
I really hope that doesn't happen.
That's so good. Thomas, what have you got?
Well, firstly, my first prediction was Dodoric to sue for defamation. So that's me sorted. Just on that, though, quickly, I reckon Kendall would absolutely crush it in prison.
I think it's the kind of routine and structure that he needs.
Yeah. So if that's the way it goes, then, you know, I reckon Kendall
But see, no, my thing is, I don't think the kids are going to prison. I feel like that's not what happens to those kinds of people. No, of course not. These guys live great lives, and everyone around them who was their political cover ends up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, it's really... I found this episode obviously troubling, as we've made clear, and I found it hard to do predictions based off of it. But then I just had this weird flash, and this will probably be another moment where you guys make fun of me, and then in 2 episodes you're like, Thomas is a genius, we should have respected him more. I found the ending of this episode really strange. Obviously we had the siblings all separate again, which happens a lot at the end of the episodes, especially this season. Kendall was like, you know, having his like eat, pray, love moment in the ocean, and Shiv and Tom were kind of back together. I found Roman the most curious, like listening to that doctored tape, you know, and he was obviously having a lot of head noise this episode about, you know, his journey and stuff. And then I just had this weird flash of like, could we see Roman and Matsson link up?
Wow.
Oh, here we go. You're suddenly showing a lot of credit in Rome. Like, you're giving Roman...
Well, I just thought, you know, originally he was the one that Matsson wanted to work with.
Yeah.
I feel like Roman's getting annoyed at Kendall, and even there's another moment in the episode where Kendall calls himself CEO and then catches himself and says co-CEO. And I just think maybe things are going to start to unravel, and maybe Roman will be like, you know what, Dad wanted to do this deal, and I was helping him do it with Matsson. Maybe I will like finish the legacy, and maybe I will link up with Lucas, and that's what should happen. So I don't know. Watch this space, but
yeah, good call. I mean,
yeah,
I think you're right in that it's a hard episode to draw much from because it felt like a little bit messy, and I wasn't quite sure what it was saying about each of the characters, but. Thomas and Mel, thank you as always.
I'm looking forward to having you over in my new Living Plus home.
I can't wait. I can't wait to live for the next 50,000 years.
Remy will cook us dinner.